are these people?
So our first story concerns this guy on the right, who was Department of Ed official who formally resigned from the department, I think now almost a week and a half ago. So this made some big news in mainstream media in particular, because there are certain people who decided to interview him, and I have some thoughts about that, but I'll share those later. So this article is pulled from The Guardian, not necessarily our favorite, but they sometimes get it right. This is written by Jonathan Geyer, who writes, "Extraordinary. Biden's administration staffers growing dissent against Gaza policy. An education department official resigns this week, and 17 staffers send an anonymous letter calling for a ceasefire." So Jonathan continues. Dissent inside the Biden administration over the president's Gaza policy is growing, with a public resignation this week of a Department of Ed official and a letter signed by no more than a dozen Biden campaign staffers calling for a ceasefire and the conditioning of aid to Israel. "It's pretty extraordinary levels of dissent," said Josh Paul, a career official working on arms sales at the State Department who resigned in protest in October of the mounting signs of discontent. "I am hearing in recent leaks from people who are thinking more seriously about resigning."
Hey, wait, go back, because we missed him. He was working on arms sales.
Yes.
Okay, let's make sure we got that in our heads first. That's what he was doing, and he got upset about it.
Right.
Okay. Just making sure.
Tariq Habash, the Department of Ed official, also says he has heard from many more officials than he had anticipated who are contemplating their own exits. "It speaks to the continued shift and concerns about our current policies," he said. "I hope it resonates with the president and the people who are making policy decisions on this issue that is affecting millions of lives." Okay, normally I don't do dissertations on this show like this, but I think it is important to read his actual resignation letter, which I did find. He did post on his Twitter thread.
Okay.
So he wrote, "Secretary Cardona, I joined the Biden administration nearly 3 years ago to fight for a more just America, to fix the broken student loan system by providing relief to millions of Americans." You didn't really do that, but I digress. "And to address systematic inequities across higher education that disproportionately affect underserved students and families. I actively campaigned for the president, helping to shape his platform on education, consumer finance, and racial justice. I was one of the first Biden administration political appointees to arrive at the Department of Education. Over the last 3 years, the White House issued numerous press releases noting that this was the most diverse administration in history, that it reflected America. I am part of that America. As a Palestinian American, in fact, the only Palestinian American official political appointee at the Department of Ed, I bring a critical and underrepresented perspective to the ongoing work on equity and justice. But now the actions of the Biden-Harris administration have put millions of innocent lives in danger, most immediately for the 2.3 million Palestinian civilians living in Gaza who remain under continuous assault and ethnic cleansing by the Israeli government. Therefore, I must resign." You were going to say?
I was just going to help you out.
Okay. Oh, thank you. "It should go without saying that all violence against innocent people is horrific. I mourn each and every loss, Israeli and Palestinian. But I cannot represent an administration that does not value all human life equally. I cannot stay silent as this administration turns a blind eye to the atrocities committed against innocent Palestinian lives in what leading human rights experts have called a genocidal campaign by the Israeli government." You can stop there. "I cannot be quietly complicit as this administration fails to leverage its influence as Israel's strongest ally to halt the abusive and ongoing collective punishment tactics that have cut off Palestinians in Gaza from food, water, fuel, electricity, fuel, and medical supplies, leading to widespread disease and starvation.
Mm.
Over the last 3 months, our government has aided in the indiscriminate violence against Palestinians in Gaza. Over 22,000 civilians killed, thousands more buried under rubble, and a vast majority displaced from their homes. Despite claims that Israel's focus is on Hamas, its military actions simultaneously persist across the West Bank, where there is no Hamas governing presence, with hundreds of Palestinians killed in the West Bank before October and hundreds more killed since. Additionally, thousands of Palestinians have been detained, arrested, and held without charge or trial, a violation of international humanitarian law. Meanwhile, the president has publicly questioned the integrity of Palestinian death counts frequently used by our own State Department, the United Nations, and numerous humanitarian non-governmental organizations. Our representatives at the United Nations have repeatedly voted against the vast majority of the international community, including vetoing resolutions calling for a ceasefire. And administration leaders have even repeated unverified claims that systematically dehumanize Palestinians.
Okay. So,
Um,
there's more. These scrollies.
yeah, this is the last page, yeah. As a Palestinian American man descended from generations of Palestinian Christians, I experience each day the dehumanization and erasure of my identity by my peers, by the media, and by my own government. My family lived through the Nakba in 1948, where hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were violently and forcibly expelled from their homes. My parents, aunts, and uncles walked over 35 miles from Jaffa to Lydia to eventually Ramallah just to survive. For 75 years, my relatives have never been allowed to return to their familiar homes. Millions of Palestinians have faced decades of occupation, ethnic cleansing, and apartheid, and the Biden administration's passive acceptance of this status quo is wholly out of line with democratic values. Our government continues to provide unconditional military funding to a government that is uninterested in protecting innocent lives. We've seen thousands of children, over 100 journalists, and countless medical professionals killed in Gaza. These deaths are just unjust. They violate our moral obligation as stewards to our country's tax dollars. They violate our obligation to abide by international humanitarian law, and they violate every level of human decency. As a higher education expert, it is also impossible to ignore the impact of this conflict across American colleges and universities. Jewish, Muslim, and Arab students on college campuses have expressed feeling less safe, and we have seen alarming violence across the United States against Palestinian and Muslim Americans who have been shot, stabbed, and even hit by cars. The Department of Ed must play an active role in supporting institutions as they respond to the needs of students, faculty, and staff. This includes protecting all students who choose to exercise their First Amendment right to engage in nonviolent actions, including expressing solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza, who have suffered tremendously in recent weeks and for years before the current ongoing violence. Let me be clear: anti-Semitism, anti-Palestinian sentiment, and Islamophobia are all abhorrent. We must not allow it in any form to permeate our society, schools, or life. But simply put, criticism of the Israeli government and its violations of international humanitarian law is not anti-Semitic. Claims that contemplate criticism of Israel's government with anti-Semitism only seek to silence dissent against a foreign government. Unfortunately, this obfuscation has been the primary objective of right-wing extremists who do not have Jewish or Arab student safety in mind as they attempt to equate calls for a ceasefire with anti-Semitism. Attributing the actions of Israel to all Jewish people makes them inherently less safe. Similarly, conflating all Palestinians with Hamas, something Israeli government officials have continuously attempted to do, makes Palestinians and Muslims everywhere less safe. Though I can no longer represent this administration, it has been a privilege to work with countless dedicated, thoughtful, and compassionate individuals across the federal government who care about making our country better. In a world too often marked by turmoil, I fervently hope for a future where we collectively embrace diplomacy before violence, communication before intransigence, and understanding before hate in order to pave a way forward lasting peace. So, That was from Tariq that he dated January 3rd.
Yeah. You believe? Well, I mean, he's getting the Palestine stuff right. You know?
Well, I would expect him to, given
he's Palestinian.
And, but I do have some stuff to say, but I think it will kind of make sense as I get into this. But as he wrote, I mean, I don't really have an issue with anything of what he wrote necessarily, but I think that I do have some issues of what he has said after this.
Sure.
That being said, let's continue to the article now.
Mm-hmm.
So back to The Guardian. A day before Habash quit, 17 current campaign staffers anonymously called for a ceasefire and conditioning military aid to Israel. The letter urged Biden to take concrete steps to end the conditions of apartheid, occupation, and ethnic cleansing that are the root causes of this conflict. An organizer of the letter, speaking on condition of anonymity, said, "We know we're not alone in this, and there is a very big coalition asking for the same thing." Wait, there we go.
Mm-hmm.
These are just the latest internal criticisms of Biden. Last month, a group of administration officials hid their faces with masks and scarves and staged a vigil in front of the White House in support of a ceasefire. More than 500 alumni of Biden's presidential campaign signed an open letter calling for a ceasefire in November, and congressional aides and U.S. aid employees sent their own petitions this fall. Current State Department officials who do not want to risk their jobs by speaking out have increasingly taken advantage of sanctioned routes to criticizing the president by filing dissent memos to the Secretary of State. What's that?
Well, people were asking in chat why anonymous, and it's like because they didn't want to lose their jobs.
Right, and there's a little bit more to this.
Yeah.
A why, which just makes it so sad and just makes
the fact
it so
that they had to hide their faces and crap.
Right.
Too is like what?
The Guardian spoke to several current political appointees and career staffers from the State Department who are critical of the administration's approach, but declined to speak on the record. Some say they are trying to create change from within. Others say that the president's entire Middle East approach is being guided by the White House and, in many sense, the president himself, defying the recommendations of policy experts. Of Habash's resignation, the White House spokesperson Karine Jean-Pierre said that people have the right to voice their opinion. She and the State Department directed questions to the Department of Education, whose spokesperson wished Habash the very best in his future endeavors. Biden's advisors sought to diffuse internal dissatisfaction with a series of listening sessions at the White House and the State Department in October and November. It's a sign of strength that an administration not only hears, but welcomes dissent from within, said Emily Thorne, a former spokesperson for the White House.
I mean,
so carefully worded letter, or we hear you, we understand you.
We hear you. We see you.
But we're not going to do shit.
No. No, we ain't doing shit. Bye. That's essentially what they said. They're like, well, bye. Like,
right.
Okay. And they're going to have a listening party. Biden can't even listen to his handlers, let alone like a group of people with actual needs. Like, okay.
Since the first days after Hamas's September 7th October attacks, the administration has shifted some of its rhetoric. Biden is now talking more about the humanitarian catastrophe than he was during the initial days of Israel's ground insurgent into Gaza, and has repeatedly urged Israel to take steps to protect civilians. But the acute situation in Gaza caused by Israel's ongoing operations, which have killed more than 22,000 Palestinians, along with risks of famine and severely restricted medical care, have overshadowed any reported shifts in U.S. policy. This week, the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, will travel to the Middle East to underscore the importance of protecting civilian lives in Israel and the West Bank and Gaza.
Which we'll get to later tonight. So,
the State Department criticized statements from Israeli ministers who have called for the relocation of Palestinians from Gaza, which we will also talk about later tonight.
Yep.
But even that condemnation came just days after the Secretary of State bypassed Congress to rush arms to Israel, which we've talked about.
Yeah.
There is a feeling among Arab Americans and Muslim Americans in government that the administration doesn't take their opinions or dissent seriously, said Jasmine El-Gamal, a former civil servant who worked on Middle East policy at the Department of Defense during the Obama years.
Obama.
Paul, the senior State Department career official who resigned in protest in October, says he's in contact with several people currently in government who are thinking about leaving over Biden's handling of Israel. If there was universal health care, there would be more people willing to resign, he said, in reference to many government employees' reliance on their jobs.
For medical care, right? That we got to have our insurance.
That's why that's why, guys.
Yep.
Bam. That they have to kind of protect themselves.
Right.
You know, especially given how powerful the Israel lobby is, like they will be forced out. You know,
they could be, sure.
They could be, but then more often than not, or the fear of them being let go, and again, as they said,
or leaving,
they'll lose their benefits.
Right.
So even in government, like the lower levels of government, there are people who are worried about the same shit that we are.
Right.
In terms of employment, in terms of keeping your employment in order to make to keep your livelihood, essentially. Like if you have family or if you have a sickness that you have to stay at your job.
Yep.
So just kind of shows how fucked up our government is, even for the people within it. Habash's resignation, coupled with the 3rd of January letter from current campaign staff, comes amid fears that Biden could be losing important members of his base as the 2024 presidential election begins in earnest. Even former Obama administration officials now hosting popular podcasts like Pod Save America have become vocally critical of Biden. Yeah, sure.
Whatever the fuck you say. Okay. Like, if you think they're being critical, you're wrong. Like,
the campaigners' letter said that re-election campaign volunteers quit in droves, and people who have voted blue for decades feel uncertain about doing so for the first time ever because of this conflict.
I mean, it's more than just this conflict, but yes.
For now, the dissent does not seem to be affecting Biden's approach or that of the close-knit circle of advisors around him. A former official speaking on the condition of anonymity downplayed the resignations and open letters. Some of these criticisms resonate, but I don't see them actually making a significant difference, they said. The times when it matters to this administration is when it starts to play into domestic politics, and becomes a concern for the next election. And
which they don't care.
Right, but they basically said the quiet part out loud. Like,
yes.
They feel like people, and I think in a way they're right. At least prior to this, that I would say generally Americans do not care about foreign policy. They do not care, or maybe are ignorant.
Pasta put out a poll the other day, like not his poll, but like a poll of like it's becoming a much higher factor that foreign policy is playing. It's like something like 60% of Democrats and like 50% of Republicans or something like that are caring more about it than other things.
Right, especially with social media and like how people can actively say on Instagram, TikTok, wherever, your policies are affecting my livelihood in this country.
Yep.
And so people are beginning to be more vocal about that.
Right.
So,
well, it's right in their face. So, you can't avoid it. So,
but I think this administration, or at least the handlers around Biden, kind of feel like, it doesn't matter because typically Americans don't care, you know, so we're good. So they're fucking around. So, and as the saying goes, they'll find out soon enough. Habash says he remains aligned with much of Biden's domestic policies.
Okay.
So,
like what?
Yeah. So,
like,
and hopes his departure pushes the president to change course on Gaza. Our elected officials are not in touch with their base and their voters. So I think, you didn't tell me what you had an issue with, but this is, I guess.
Yeah, you could. It's apparent. That's one. This is also the fact that they only give a fuck because it's an election issue for them. Like, this guy, besides, I'm sure he actually cares, being a Palestinian, but to not notice any of the other domestic policies that are terrible.
Right.
Like, I mean, it's just, it's so frustrating.
I will say,
that,
just
like,
even the fact that he's in the Department of Ed, student loans, and we've gone ad nauseum
crazy amounts about how he fucked that up.
Like, I'm seeing on Reddit, and again, like, the only reason that I was able to get my student loans forgiven, not because of the Biden administration or this guy.
No, it was like Bush.
Reddit.
Right. Yeah.
Reddit saved my ass.
Yeah.
Shout out to Reddit. But, like, I'm still in that subreddit, regarding student loans, and there are people still bitching, and rightly so, about how fucked up, like, even just trying to get their student loans forgiven is, like, still a task for many people. Yeah. So
if they can afford it at all, which has been the problem. I mean, you talk about universal health care, universal education is also important. So I don't know. It just frustrates me that it's like, it's this. Well,
he just seems.
It's that this is the only issue Joe Biden has. That's what they're trying to make it seem. Like,
right, in terms of, this is a one issue that not as many people care about as, social media or otherwise believe that they do. And honestly, given even this week in relation to, Biden at Mother Emanuel on Monday, you would think that's the case, because there were many stands, or at least alleged stands, who are going to bat for Biden even in the midst of that. We'll get to that later. But, the idea that there's so many people who are really, like, apathetic to politics anyway, and now given what's happening in Israel and just a blatant disrespect in terms of our funding and just our allegiance to Israel at the cost of people here. It's very damning. And then, just with inflation and, like, finances and student loans and, all these issues that we're still kind of grappling with, that the administration is pretending that they actually did something for. It's like, it feels like a lottery for certain folks. Like, I get this, but not this. I
think some people buy that shit.
And then
they cook these books, and then they fucking idiots who should know better buy it. They're like, oh, well, they say they did. It's like, okay, but I guarantee you people's pocketbooks are still drying out.
Tight.
Like, so, like, people's day-to-day lives have not gotten better in any category.
Right.
It's like that child tax credit didn't do much for everyone else. Like, and we talked about that too. The two little crumbs they've given have been dog shit. So
anyway, so Habash ended up on Joy Reid.
Yep.
Now, even with that, I'm kind of like, how did that happen? Or why did that happen? Because you would think that the administration would want to downplay it, but I guess not. So, so you're gonna hear what he says to her, regarding his resignation here. We can play the whole thing, if it does play. But yeah, go ahead.
The Israel-Hamas war is setting President Biden at odds with American voters, his own supporters, and members of his own administration. Late today, Tarek Habash, a first-generation Palestinian American and Biden administration political appointee at the Department of Education, resigned over Biden's Gaza strategy. In his resignation letter to Education Secretary Miguel Cardona, Habash wrote, quote, "The actions of the Biden-Harris administration have put millions of innocent lives in danger, most immediately for the 2.3 million Palestinian civilians living in Gaza, who remain under continuous assault and ethnic cleansing by the Israeli government. Therefore, I must resign. I cannot stay silent as this administration turns a blind eye to the atrocities committed against innocent Palestinian lives in what leading human rights experts have called a genocidal campaign by the Israeli government." And joining me now for his first television interview since resigning late today is Tarek Habash, now a former Department of Education Special Assistant. Tarek, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you started out on the Biden campaign as an idealist.
Yeah.
What was the final straw in saying, I can't stay here anymore?
You know, Joy, I worked on the administration's agenda for the last 3 years. I volunteered on the campaign, helping shape the education policy agenda, and we've done a lot of really great work. Unfortunately, all of that great work has been completely overshadowed because of the president's complete unwillingness to demand an immediate and permanent ceasefire. And it is creating immense danger for millions of Palestinians in Gaza, but also for Americans here at home.
Yeah, and you cited in your letter some of the sort of restatements of false information that have dehumanized Palestinians. That would include President Biden, who did repeat early on, you know, some things that turned out not to check out, that accused Palestinians of, or accused Hamas of, but also just saying he didn't believe the numbers of Palestinian dead, which the UN believes. How did that feel, just as a Palestinian American, to hear the president say, I don't believe it?
I mean, it's heartbreaking. It hurts. It is a dehumanizing thing to hear from the president of the United States, someone who you worked so hard to campaign for and elect and support his policies, that, you know, your life is not valuable. Your identity means less than other people's identities, and it's okay that tens of thousands of people who look like you and who have similar backgrounds and heritage are dying and being massacred, and that hurts.
What was the reaction? What reaction did you get from Secretary Cardona when you handed him this letter?
The secretary was extremely understanding. He was very supportive. You know, I think he always talks about putting faith and family first before work, and you know, he was extremely empathetic. He cares about me. And I appreciate that. I've gotten that type of support from across the administration, from colleagues at the Department of Education, but also colleagues in other areas of the government who have been wanting to speak out and who have been interested in dissenting.
Do you get the sense that there are a lot of other people in the Biden campaign and in the administration who feel the way you do, that are maybe not saying anything?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people are saying something. I think that we've seen hundreds of State Department officials sign on to numerous dissent cables that were leaked. We've seen USAID officials, we've seen White House staff, we've seen interns, we've seen hundreds of officials across the administration from dozens of agencies. This is a pretty commonly held position by a lot of the biggest supporters of the president, and the majority of American voters support a ceasefire, but the president's unwillingness to move on this policy is deafening, and it hurts. How
do you square that? Because Biden really is the empathy guy, right? And empathy is kind of his superpower. It's the thing he's known for more than almost anything else. How do you square for yourself and explain why he doesn't seem to be able to project or have that empathy when it comes to the Palestinian people? Why do you think that is?
I don't know the answer to that, to be honest with you. I agree with you that the president has always been the empathetic person, the person who you can look up to and relate to and share emotions with. But when it comes to Palestinians, it seems like, you know, we don't deserve the same type of empathy and humanization that other people do. And I think that's in part due to decades of dehumanization of Palestinians by our government officials, by our media, and it's extremely problematic. It undermines humanity for millions of people, and it allows for the undermining of humanity by people everywhere.
You know, you were the only Palestinian American in the Department of Education, but you also were a campaign guy. You worked on the campaign. This is not the most important thing, electoral politics, but it kind of is because our democracy is at stake. What are you going to do in November? Do you have would you vote for Joe Biden?
I think that's up to him. You know, I did volunteer to support the campaign. I've supported the president for the last 3 years in every single thing I do in my professional life. And the reality is, the president's in power. He is the one whose name is on the ballot, and it's his policies. If he wants to earn my vote and the vote of millions of Americans who support peace and an end to violence, that's up to him.
Yeah, I think anyone, no matter how you feel about this issue, must respect somebody who is willing to take a stand. And taking a stand and walking away from your job is a pretty big deal. Tara Kabash, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much.
Enough respect. Thank you.
Oh,
Pull back up that. Pull up that
tweet again.
that chat.
Yeah.
I'll be in the air. See, this is my problem with people like this. So we're fine with every. Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
I think you kind of knew before without not knowing, but then like I think it just and I get that impression, you know, as well. Golden Monarch also said democracy ain't at stake. It's the working class that's at stake, and countries massively affected by war crimes from US/NATO. Yeah, I don't want to be mean to this.
He was the I'll be mean. He fucking said that he was like the empathy guy. He agreed with that statement.
No, but not even that. But he was just
He
like,
said
when
Biden
Joy
was
asked him,
to
like,
look
what are you
up
going
to
do? Like, he kind of was like, he said, you know, it's up to Biden. And how are you going to make it up to Biden? That's the question.
Right.
Like, just you resigning, he ain't paying dust to you at this point. Like, the question is, you resigned. What do you plan to do now? And what do you encourage voters to do? I think he's still kind of like, he gives the impression like, oh, if he calls for a ceasefire, then I'll vote for him.
Right.
That's kind of the impression that I get. Like,
which they're going to argue like, they already called for a ceasefire and got like a week. You know, and he's like, oh, well, okay. Like, it
just seems like he's.
Which right now they've been walking back all their statements. We're gonna get to that.
He cares about Palestine, but everything. Well, he said everything else is okay with him. And again, student loan debt. There are plenty of issues, within that whole mess that he thinks is okay. Not to the coins of the people that.
This is the guy. Remember, Collin. This should be the guy that would have been able to write everyone's student debt off with a wave of a pen, right? If he's the head of the Department of Education.
Right. So,
like, that was on him. He could have done that.
Well, the fact that, like, Habash, I guess, seems like high up, that he was able to have that connection with Cadona in that way. You know, like the way that and actually there's a lot of stuff that they haven't even mentioned in the administration regarding student loan forgiveness, just as an aside.
No.
That they haven't communicated. I probably will have to do a story, like maybe a quick story on that, because there's been updates even to that, you know, as far as deadlines and shit that haven't been openly communicated by the public that people may not necessarily know. So, yeah, I think I probably will have to do something on that as an extra segment or whatever some other time. But yeah, I think for me, yeah, like in doing the story and you were kind of like something was off. Yeah, you kind of called it, like in terms of he just seems to be very much impacted by Palestine, as he should be.
Which, speaking of Palestine, no talk about East Palestine wasn't a problem for you. Lahaina wasn't a problem for you. Like, I mean, what if this is your only line?
he just seems to be, and I think in a way that's why my guess is that's why Joy Reid had him on. Because God forbid if he was more radical in his language, there was no way he was going to get on her show.
It's
But
like this
he's still,
issue was
like,
important
he's
to
still
me,
playing-
so even her questioning was like, this isn't the most important thing, like, you know, but would you still vote for him? Like, hoping that he'd be like, yeah, like, you know,
yeah.
Even then, it was a milquetoast response of like, well, that's on him. Yeah, but like, explain that. Tell people why that's on him. Like, yeah, this is
like he should have had. He had the platform that he really should have gone in and really be like, look, I am not voting for Biden because of blah blah blah, and regardless if we have Trump or not, like, this is what people are saying on the ground. This is how I feel. And so if Biden wants to earn my vote, he needs to do this and make demands.
Yeah.
But he didn't do that. So I think just really he just is within that bubble of, yeah, I hate him on this one issue, but I can overlook everything because it's seemingly good, even though it's very incremental at best. So,
yep. Well, let us know what you think. Leave a comment. Make sure to share the stream, please. Like and subscribe. Like this video. Help Biden get to 2K subscribers. We're getting there. Hit that button if you haven't done it already. Let me go check. Rockfin. We got some people in there. Anna Mayers is in there. She tipped us $2, $3, I think.
Hey, thank you.
Knocked me over my 2 faves back to back. So appreciate you. If there's anyone Rumble, make sure you leave a chat. Let us know you're real people over there. So, or, you know, if you're a lizard person, leave something in there too. I don't care. You know, like, whatever.